Hello, everyone, and welcome to another OpenShift Commons. Really excited today. We're changing it up, and we have Martin Hickey here from IBM, who's going to give us a Helm update. And Brad, thank you so much for joining. I wasn't sure if you'd be able to join. Brad is also from IBM, and we have Andrew Block, who hopefully most of you know. He's a Red Hat consultant, and he wrote a book on Helm, which is nothing small. So
or so I'm told, I guess.
Your name's on it. Your name's on it.
Basically.
Right. So today, since we're changing it up, we're also going to, throw away the slides so we don't have to force you to go watch some slides. And we're going to start with Martin. And Martin, if you want to just kick it off with although we just lost Martin. Where'd you go? There you are.
There he is.
If you want to just kick it off with an, intro to Helm and go for it.
Thank you very much for having me on board, Karina, and to all the OpenShift Commons folks. Yeah, we'd have done a slide deck, but we're not. We're just going to chat, I think.
Slides are boring anyways.
I think they are, and I'm going to be put on the spot here because somebody has written a book that they want about a topic, so I'm going to be quizzing Andrew about stuff that I should know about in Helm. So Andrew, don't go anywhere too fast, okay? So as you say, thanks very much for having me on board. My name is Martin Hickey. I work for IBM in the Open Technology Group. I spend a lot of time out in open source communities, and I'm a maintainer in the Helm community. So it's great to get on board here to have a chat about Helm. How would you like me to kick off, Karina? Any topics?
Well, first, what is Helm? I mean, we should all know, but it'd be great to hear it from you, what you think Helm is.
Okay, I think that's probably the best place to start. I suppose Helm it's a lot of things to a lot of people, if that makes sense. It usually comes up, it usually gets the name of the package manager for Kubernetes. And I suppose for me, looking at it from my point of view and from talking to people over the last few years and also in the community, it really, I suppose one of its core things that it always keeps on board is allowing somebody new coming to Kubernetes to be able to get to know Kubernetes or to be able to install their apps into Kubernetes. I think everyone on this call, even though we work out in Kubernetes communities in different parts, Kubernetes is difficult. It's big, it's large, its APIs are just increasing every release, the amount of resources that are out there. So one of the key things we always look at is that person starting out, wanting to see how does Kubernetes work. If I don't know, if I put a MongoDB, if I deploy MongoDB into my cluster, what's going to come up? Can I take a look at what's in underneath the hood? So it's that simplification I think it brings to start with, and that's on one side. And then at the other side is the person that's controlling the cluster, that's deploying their stuff out into their cluster. I suppose an example I have is lately I was installing Istio into a cluster, and I used Istio's Helm charts to do it. And I installed using Hem23, the latest version of Helm. And I looked and I went, my goodness, there must have been, I don't know, 10, 12 different CRDs. They were using every object you could think of under the hood. All the different Kubernetes objects, they had serious charts. You know what I mean? Really, really big charts. You know what I mean? It was amazing to see. So these are the kind of the scales we look at. The other side of it then is I suppose just two types of particular maybe users of Helm, what I talked about. One is the consumer, so that Helm can nicely package up all your manifest files and put it into a logical container, like, that's similar to a folder or a directory that we have in an operating system, and that somebody can just take that chart and go Helm install. They don't have to know what's inside in those template files or the manifest files, whatever you want to call it. They can just install that. And then you have the person who's constructing the chart. So they're the person then that knows all right, what are the particular objects I want to put out there so that I can get that app out there? So I think that's what it brings to a lot of people. You know, it can be for the person starting out, or it can be the person that's really experienced. Also too, I think the beauty of it is that extraction of the configuration from the resources you want to deploy or the Kubernetes objects you want to deploy. And I think the beauty to that is if, for example, you want to deploy, I don't know, some web server like Nginx or Apache, etc., and you want to maybe deploy 3 versions of it out into your cluster. So previously, you're taking your manifest files, you're modifying those manifest files, and then basically, you know, you change it for each deployment you're doing. With Helm, it gives you that ability to just do an install and maybe pass a different values file or just different configuration, and that will deploy it in there, or give it a different release name. So I think that's what it gives you. It gives that level of abstraction from between the configuration and the underlying resource objects, and also the ability for the person starting out or the newbie, and then the more experienced person of our underlying, I suppose, cloud operating system, Kubernetes. Don't silence. Oh my goodness.
So
Nah.
Never a good
really
sign.
wants to join the Helm discussion.
No, so from my standpoint, as you mentioned, Martin, it's a package manager. You get a brand new laptop. It has Windows, it has an OS X, it has Linux. The first thing you're going to do is you want to install things. You have Kubernetes. It's vanilla by itself. Or if you have like an OpenShift container platform, it has some services that are coming with the platform. You want to deploy your own things. As you mentioned earlier, you just have the YAML files. That's hard. What is a service? What is an ingress? What is a deployment? I don't know what those are if I'm brand new to Kubernetes, but I can just go ahead and do Helm install, Nginx, and oh, I have an Nginx container, or I have a web server. That is so foundational to be able to understand the platform so much easier, because you're able to have users be able to see things. Ooh, I can go ahead and spin up a pod automatically and then be able to communicate it because it created an ingress or a route in OpenShift. That to me is the wow factor that Helm provides, because otherwise the onboarding and ramp up period is just too great for many individuals, especially with Kubernetes.
Yeah, and I think your analogy with the OS is good, and even if we come into your realm around Fedora and the Red Hat client and stuff like that, when you look at it this way, there's, most of us, if we put when we put an OS on our laptop, for example, like Fedora for a long time on mine was, you're normally just a consumer. You just want to put the packages out there. You just want to use it. But then you have the other people who like to go out into the community, who likes to be in the Linux community, etc., and producing content out there. So yeah, it's the similarities are, they're uncanny and they make sense.
And even when you start to talk about how we go ahead and share charts, think about Yum repositories or brew taps, similar concept in Helm. You can use repositories in Helm to be able to share charts. And especially with some of the newer implementations regarding the OCI format, we're starting to see Docker registry or container registries be able to start supporting the storage of Helm charts. It makes it even easier to take the existing tools that we already have in place and reuse them for new purposes, to be able to take advantage of the technology that we have out there.
Yeah, and I think that's great you brought that up, Andrew, because this is something that came in Hem23, and we brought in the concept of, experimental features. So up to then, it was a fully fledged feature before you saw it in a particular release. But with the idea of bringing in the experimental features like they're doing in Kubernetes, it allowed us to bring in the OCI registry. Now, the OCI registry support is still a work in progress, because there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes with the OCI community itself. And the concept here so at the moment, we still have the concept of OCI registries are for storing Docker containers. So the idea here going forward is, what if we have different media? So for example, the Helm charts, as you mentioned, or anything else, even videos, whatever you want to put in there. So the idea here is, the ability to be able to use something other than repository. And the registry, the OCI registry is a great idea because you already, for most people that work out in Kubernetes, you're already going to have your Docker containers, your images out there. So the idea here that you now can put your charts in there as well brings an extra, I suppose, bow to your plate.
And I work with a lot of large organizations, and they really hate having to add more and more tools into their infrastructure. So being able to reuse existing tools to be able to take advantage of different technologies. Now, Brad, you haven't had a chance to really speak your mind thus far. Did you have anything in particular you want to talk about regarding Helm?
Well, I more wanted to ask Martin some questions because that's a lot more fun. So
Put him on the spot.
I've stocked a few. We're not going to let him off the witness chair yet. So Martin, can you talk about the enhancements that were added to Helm version 3 compared to version 2, and did those help reduce the friction of people being able to use Helm? How did that make life better? Because there were some dramatic changes.
Yeah, I think we before I kind of answer that question, I think I'm going to do a small little bit of history on this to see, how Hem23 came about and why Hem23 came about. So to start with, and it would have been before my time in the community, back at the first Helm Summit in, it was about early 2018, there was a big, or maybe, yeah, I think it was early 2018, there was a big push to, remove Tiller. So what Tiller was a service in Helm 2 that sat inside the cluster. The client talked to Tiller, and Tiller talked to the Kubernetes API service. Okay, and for a lot of people, Tiller caused a lot of friction, particularly if you used Helm straight out of the box, because Tiller ran in God mode. So what I mean in that situation is it could do anything it wanted in the cluster. So that means if you ran any command, it was allowed to do whatever it wanted. So that was just a big no-no for most cluster admins, etc. So now, with that said, you could configure it and make it more secure. You could have different instances of Tiller running, but for a lot of people, they were trying to wonder why that was there. So if we go back a little bit to the history then of how Helm 2 came about, was that ended up being a collaboration between the DAS that had basically created Helm and Google and Google's deployment service. Okay, so what the decision was made was to bring both of them together. The Helm version 1, which was called Helm Classic, which was just the client-only architecture, with the deployment service, and it created a Helm 2, which was your client and your particular service in the cluster. So fast forward then to Helm 3, there was a big push in the community then to bring Helm 3 out. So getting back to Brad's question, what did it bring to the table? So I think one of the key messages coming out of it was simplification and security. Okay, so the idea here, do we really need a service in the cluster? Or why can't the Helm client talk directly to the Kubernetes API service? So that was one of the first things to happen, the taking out of this service Tiller. And what that required then was quite a large refactor underneath the hood. But what it did was it probably cut the code base nearly in half. Okay, so it removed a particular amount of code that was no longer necessary or deprecated. And it also brought the advantage then of some issues that users were having around gRPC issues, connection issues with the Tiller service. They of course disappeared because now you were talking to the Kubernetes API service exactly how kubectl does. So in the particular Kubernetes way. What that then brought was the security factor then that Kubernetes provides. And this is around your RBAC, your user authentication, authorization, etc. Now that capability, because it wasn't there when Helm 2 was being created, RBAC was probably at an embryonic stage, and all the security that was being put into Kubernetes, it now was able to be used by Helm the same as kubectl does. So for me, I suppose they were probably the key factors for a lot of people that came out in Helm 3.
Okay. And you know, Martin, last time when we were actually physically at a KubeCon conference, I remember going to the Helm talks, and there was just huge rooms of people that had interest in Helm, and so there's that huge amount of adoption of Helm. But at the same time, we're seeing newer models for deploying applications, right? So you can create an operator and use the operator SDK to create an operator. And so you have this interesting world of all this existing stuff that you don't want to throw away and you want to reuse, yet the state of the art is changing for ways to deploy applications. What is being done to make sure that all that great work that's been done as Helm charts still lives on as we have these newer deployment models? What synergies are you seeing?
Yeah, so I think one thing you touched on there around the Helm charts is very important. I would say one of the greatest achievements of Helm has been the Helm chart, okay? And Helm chart is, I don't know how you describe it, it's kind of like one of those inventions like Velcro. You know, it just is simple, it's useful, and you say to yourself, how in the name of goodness did I not patent that before that man did? I think he was a Dutchman in the 60s somewhere, where, you know, the little things that stick to your clothes when you're out hiking. I think he was the first person to see the value. I think he actually patented, and we didn't see Velcro till 10 years ago or whatever. But it's just the way that it allows you to give a standard structure or format of your app or your apps that you want to deploy. And I think that's the beauty of it. And I give you an example that even in the community today, and people are coming in asking questions, not everybody uses every aspect of the Helm engine. And what I mean by that is, so generally, yes, you can take a chart, you can go in Helm install, you can do an upgrade, etc. And then some people use the lifecycle management of the apps. But then sometimes people just use the templating aspect. So with Helm, you get that little 10 layer of templating on top of your Kubernetes manifest files. And that templating gives you this ability for logic, programming logic in there. So your ifs, etc. It also pulls the configuration out. So what people sometimes do is they run the command, and this command came in as an ID a few years ago by a community member, and the maintainers, it was before my time, at the time said, do you know what, this is functionality we should put into core, and they put it into core. And what Helm template, the command does, it basically renders the template file for you into the manifest files. So with that then, you can then pipe that into kubectl. So you could actually do your install with kubectl instead of using Helm to do the install. So Helm gives you that flexibility. That's one of the things I think it is. Now, if we go then to, as you say, you mentioned operators, etc. So we then get into the conversation about day one, day two, etc. So yeah, when you look at operators bring a lot to the table. They bring you that ability where you can put that complex business logic into the operator, and that operator can manage the complexities of an app that's out there. So for example, I don't know, maybe it's a database that needs to be running 24/7. Maybe somebody, you know, before some poor person had to be up all night in the middle of the night, you know, making sure that, you know, before in DevOps that the particular environment didn't go down. Whereas now with your operators, you get that capability that it can basically recover from that it's checking that database. It has that logic in there. And even I've seen today, there seems to be operators out there that could have, I don't know, 10,000 lines of code in it. This is, when you think about it, is massive. So it has that business logic into it. And where Helm, I suppose, comes in then is I suppose around the day one, where it can do those installations in. It can install your operators in, etc. like that. So when I look at it, I think operators and Helm, if you look at it, you know, they can exist independently and they can coexist together. Okay, and I think as these technologies evolve going forward, it's only going to be for the betterment of users and your operators and your DevOps people. So I think there's basically a great synergy there with both of the technologies, and I look forward to how they evolve as they go forward.
For me, one of the underutilized features of Helm is going to be hooks to be able to manage the lifecycle of application. We talked about operators; they can really manage the full lifecycle of applications. I mean, I love operators; they are foundational to I spend most of my days in the OpenShift world, and especially regarding the operator SDK becoming a project adopted by the CNCF. We're going to see even more with operators. But those of you who want to just use Helm charts, you can use a full lifecycle management of applications using hooks to be able to inject functionality at different points in the lifecycle of an application, of a chart itself, pardon me. So if you want to do an upgrade, you can manage database upgrades or an application upgrade or perform tasks or different functions at different points in time. That's another big benefit of Helm that I've seen very used by my customers quite a bit.
Yeah, actually, Andrew, I'm going to pick up on that one if that's okay, because this is a very interesting thing what you said. And I'm going to go back to it again. Helm set out with the idea of being able to install your app into the cluster. In the time that it came, I suppose it started around the time Kubernetes started. It has always wanted to keep that core basic model, being a user being able to install their app into the cluster. In time, lots of great new advancements have come in Kubernetes. I bring in the great CRDs, customer resource definitions, that still are trying to be understood properly in the Kubernetes community, because there's still a lot of work to do with them. And what we found over time is that you can make Helm do so many things, especially on hooks, CRDs, etc. But there's certain capabilities that Helm just is not able to support all the time. And we always talk about that and say, and it's something we did with Hem23 with CRDs, is that we removed the ability to update and delete CRDs in Helm. So in Hem23 now, it will install CRDs if that CRD is not already in the cluster, but it's not going to do the rest of the CRUD, the update or delete on it. And the reason behind that is, I suppose we're trying to protect people that maybe are using Helm, but maybe don't have that advanced understanding of Kubernetes, as you mentioned, Andrew, with some of your customers and yourself. And what we mean by that is that if we allowed updates and deletes of CRDs, because CRDs are cluster-wide, and I use CRDs as an example, because they're cluster-wide, you don't know what app is using that particular CRD. So for example, I might install app A, and it might have the CRD inside in the chart, and app A uses that particular CRD and has a custom resource created for that. But I don't realize then that somebody else in a different, if it's a multi-tenant cluster, may also then use that CRD, and they install their app B. And then suddenly I say, oh, I'm finished now with my app, and I go delete of my app. Before, it allowed you to, Helm would delete the CRD as well, but you can imagine what happens then. I delete my app, which deletes the CRD, and then the person that had app B no longer can use it. So, and then there's also the ability to change the actual schema without updating the version of the CRD. So there's a lot of things like that that we get requests into the community, and we have to just say, sorry, look, we're not going to put that in because of the dangers to people. And also too, we found as well at conferences, like people come up to us with amazing things they're doing with Helm, and we're going, oh my goodness, do you know what I mean? Like this is advanced stuff, and we're kind of going, we wouldn't have even have thought of that. So yeah, it gives you that level of flexibility, yes.
So really quick, I know Andrew has to drop shortly, so we just want to ask one quick question. And we did have a question from the chat So I'll ask you, Andrew, what Helm chart is your favorite? Which do you love the most? If you can.
I can't say I have any favorite. It's the ones that implement certain patterns that I tend to focus on, and ones that can be reusable. And then there's this concept of library charts. The idea to integrate certain functions across multiple charts. So I can create a reusable set of components that can be then reused in other charts. That's one of the areas that was brought into for Helm 3 is this concept of library charts. I know, Martin talked a little bit about some of the new functions and new features. That's one of the big benefits that I've seen with my customers is they can create these more reusable chart components and then reuse that in different groups within the organization. So I kind of took your question and the question from the viewer and kind of spun it a little bit to talk about some of the features that Helm provides, but also some of the key areas that I see in my customers.
Yeah, and Andrew, it's a funny one because library charts was in Helm 2 for your FYI, and it's just that we made it a first-class citizen in Helm 3, and it got over the idea of that, the thing about a Helm chart is it looks like a chart, but as Andrew says, what it's doing is it's giving you common code that you can use across charts. It's following the dry pattern, the reuse pattern that's commonly out there. And one of the key parts is it's not renderable. So which means we usually take our charts, they render down, and you can install them into the cluster. You cannot install library chart in the cluster. So what we want to do in Helm 3 was just put in the capability into the core because we're very cognizant of backwards compatibility, and we don't want to break things. So sometimes capability can't go into a minor release, so we have to watch for a major release to go out, and that's one of the key tenets we keep in the community is to respect that backwards compatibility with sim versioning. So when we brought that capability, we would say, right, we're going to put the logic in here now that if somebody tries to install a library chart, it's just basically going to say, it's a library chart, you can't install it. And also what it allowed us, because we didn't want to break the backwards compatibility, is we have a new field called type inside in the chart.yaml, and that type field defaults to application, which was the way charts always were in Helm 1 and Helm 2, that their application, they can be installed into the cluster, and now we have the one called library. So it also gives us that capability is if we add more logic and more types going forward, we can extend out.
Thank you. And thanks, Andrew, for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And we'll keep going. Sad to see Andrew leave, but we still have Austin here. I don't know if he wanted to join, but AJ, I do want to address your comment. AJ is asking about Helm in OpenShift and Red Hat. So Helm became a first-class citizen, right, with OpenShift 4, and it was tech preview in 4.3, and now with 4.4, it is, GA within OpenShift. So you'll see more and more support. But getting back to, core Helm, and you mentioned, so Martin, you mentioned backward compatibility. I was wondering if we could discuss migration from 2 to 3 and changes in backward compatibility there, because I know people will wonder about that, as well as migration.
Sure, but before I go on here, there's no such thing as a free dinner. So I have a question for you folks, and maybe it's for AJ, I'm not sure. So I thought it was brilliant that you made Helm first-class citizen in, I think it was 4.4, was it? In OpenShift 4.4. I saw it one day and I was delighted. I was doing a search or something and I goes, yay, because I knew you had it in the dev, I think dev mode, is it? You call it?
In dev preview and tech preview. And so Siamak, he couldn't join us today, but he's the product manager that really drove that. And I know there's some of the engineers all right now. So
that's brilliant. Thanks for putting that on board. And one question for you. I don't mind who answers it. Why did you decide to make Hem23 first-class citizen?
Unmute. Gonna see who I wanted to pick on. I don't know, Shuvik or Predrag, if you wanted to jump in. I know you've worked with.
I could jump in. So I think, Martin, your question is why did we make Hem23 a first-class citizen, right? Yeah, so I think from a technical perspective, I was very happy that we didn't have to have our SRE teams with OpenShift dedicated, etc., have troubles with Tiller, to be honest, because we could fall back on the, out of the box RBAC model in OpenShift. For me, technically, I love that. From an engineering perspective, I found it supportable. That's one. And then from a user-based perspective, everybody loved charts, Helm charts. I think from a user perspective, that was there. So because users loved it, and because from an engineering perspective, we could support it, Siamak and I and the different folks got together to say, hey, we have all the pieces in there. Let's ensure it works with OpenShift specific APIs. We have an build config, deployment config, and ship it. And that's what we did. And then the next step was that how do we ensure that we can give developers a good experience on our developer perspective in console, which is where a lot of work actually went in to ensure that it's awesome that the Helm is an ICLI and we also shipped a build of that. But then the goal was to also ensure that if somebody is a UI user and just wants to visualize how to install, rollback, upgrade, that was there too. And we saw that it did fit into our developer perspective model that our team was investing. So that's how the whole decision about going with Helm came in, Martin.
Okay, that's brilliant. It's good that that came on board. I was quite happy when I saw that.
Yep,
so I have a follow-up question. Are we seeing, now that's the first-class citizen in OpenShift 4.4, are we seeing requirements for Helm coming from OpenShift, or is it pretty much, no, it works perfect as is, and we just needed to make it a first-class citizen?
Yeah, good question. So I think from the core functionality perspective, that works as is. But there are some things that we have proposed upstream and we've also included in our upcoming release, is that the ability to define repo configuration on the cluster. Today, you can do you can add a new Helm repo on your CLI. There's no equivalent of that at a cluster level for an admin to maintain. So that's something that we've proposed upstream. We've actually gone through an OpenShift enhancement proposal process, which is a very open process that we have internally, but it's public. And we've actually exposed the capability on the developer console perspective. Behind the scenes, it uses a new CRD, but the user doesn't have to know that. But then we've tried to figure out how do we gradually build out a more cluster experience around some of the things which were meant to live in the CLI forever. And then we'll see how to best work out with upstream and ensure that they align with the entire ecosystem better. So from a core engine perspective, things work amazing. From an experience perspectives, we are adding new things.
Okay, that's great. And I've seen some of those proposals upstream as well. So we look forward to more input from you and your folks.
And I'd like to quickly give a shout out to Predrag. He's the lead on that team who's doing the productization and all the plumbing. So yeah, quick shout out to him.
And he is on this call. I don't know if you wanted to jump in too. But I know we have lots of Helm people here today. It's awesome.
Okay.
Thanks, Shubham. Go ahead, Martin.
Karina, do you want someone to jump in, or do you want to go back to the question you asked? Because obviously I threw it back at you. I did an Irish thing. I asked a question with a question. So yeah.
Well, I would love to go back to the question that I asked, because I know a lot of some people are struggling still with the migration from 2 to 3. and just wondering if you could talk through that. I know you were instrumental in, the migration toolkit, or the migration tooling, I mean. So if you want to talk through kind of what you did and why.
Okay, I think I think that'd be a good place to go. So to just kind of do a high level view of when we talked about some of the capabilities that went in for in Helm v3, we should also be that this required underneath the hood. I suppose it was nearly like a re-architecture or refactor of the plumbing and all the underlying way we store data and so forth when we made that change. So what it meant was, and two of the key features to that would be how we stored our local configuration. So what I mean by that is your plugin information, your local repository list, etc. The format it was stored and how it was stored locally, and then also the release information. So the release information is very important because, in case people don't know, the release information is when you do your Helm LS and you see the different apps you've deployed or different charts you've deployed, it shows that release information gets stored in the cluster. So what we did with that too was we made quite a bit of a change to the objects under the hood that's stored. So what it meant was there was no longer a one-to-one mapping between the local state information and then the release metadata information between 2 and 3. So today, if anyone is, wants to play around with Helm, you can have Helm 2 and Helm 3 managed in the same cluster, okay? Managing your apps in the same cluster because they are, as for want of a better word, independent really of each other, okay? So you're not going to walk up on top of each other on it. So what that meant to us was we needed migration here. So this wasn't a simple case of pull down your binary, get rid of Tiller, and away you go. Because what it meant was, how would you manage your previous releases that you deployed with Helm? And I don't think anyone here wants to just dump the releases that they've deployed. I think they still want to manage them. So we came up with an idea over, I suppose, as Helm 3 was moving along, and this issue actually came up at KubeCon 2018. I think that was around December, I think, that year. And somebody brought it up in the deep dive. We were having a conversation afterwards in the deep dive, and they brought it up. And it basically got put in as an issue to community, and we worked on it then. So the way we worked around it was we decided that, right, we need documentation definitely to explain it, because there's two ways you can do this. You can manage the migration yourself. What I mean by that is you decide that every new release I'm going to deploy, I'll use Helm 3. And in the previous ones in Helm 2, I'll leave it there and I'll manage it. And over time then, ones that I no longer need, I'll delete them. And eventually I'll come to a day where, you know what, the amount of releases I've been with Helm 2 managing are so minuscule now, I can get rid of Helm 2, okay? But then we wanted an automated way of doing it, because some people would want to migrate across in situ, i.e. bring their releases across, bring the configuration across, and start managing straight away with Helm 3. So we developed a plugin for it, and it's called the Helm 2 to 3 plugin. And what it does is it migrates across your configuration, and it migrates across the releases. And what's nice about this is when we started initially, so there's two nice bits to it. Is when you're migrating across your release, you can do a dry run, so you can see what release and its revisions are going to come across. So what I mean by revisions is that every time you upgrade your particular release, it gets a new revision. So some people might even have 100 revisions of a particular release, which is probably, it's going to fill up your cluster. But so what I mean is you can see what you're going to bring across, you can test it out, and then you can bring it across. And then one by one, then you can delete those releases that Helm 2 was managing. And when I mean delete by that, it's just deleting the Helm 2 metadata. It does not touch the Helm 3 metadata or the deployment objects, the resources you've deployed into the cluster. So the migration doesn't touch those, it's just touching the metadata itself. So what it does, it gives you that path to migrate across. And we would be suggesting to people, recommending to people to look at migration now migrating across, because in case you don't know, Helm v2 is going end of life in November. We're currently not accepting any bug changes now, bug fixes, and we're only looking at security fixes between now and November. So it's probably a good time to check out the migration and get going with it.
Thank you. Austin, did you want to say anything about, or would you like to say anything about migration, what you're seeing at customers, or since you're on site a lot?
Hey, yeah, sure, Karina. You know, most of my customers started right at Helm 3. I think they were kind of waiting to, you know, wait for the project to incubate fully. And of course, now it's a graduated project. Actually, Martin, one of the questions that I had, if I could just kind of pivot. So I've been working with Helm for the past, I want to say, year and a half, since probably Helm 2.7, 2.8, and customers ask me all the time, what is the best way to handle secrets in your values files? And we always come up with some, you know, some solution, but it doesn't seem like there's anything built into Helm. I know that there's a Helm secrets plugin. Are there any plans to bring that into the, you know, Helm org, or are there anything? Is there any solutions that you guys are, you know, focused on?
Yeah, that's a good question, Andrew, because it does come up a bit. I think the thing with this is we try to avoid bloating the capability of Helm. And it kind of goes back to what I mentioned at the start, is we really want to keep Helm for the user who's starting out primarily, and the ability to do those things without, you know, overcomplicating Helm. But what we've allowed with Helm is the ability to expand Helm. So by putting the plugin framework in place, what it gives the user is that if they develop capability that cannot go straight into core, with the framework, they can pick up a lot of the environmental variables, etc., of Helm, and they can basically write the plugin. It can be run using a Helm command. So for example, the 2-3 plugin gets run as Helm 2-3, like that. So it's being run by Helm itself. And around the secrets is there's so many ways to do that we've never taken that capability in, or we found capability that would stand alone or work well inside in the core base. Okay, so that's probably one of the reasons why we do it. And then there's been a series of plugins after that. With capability like this, we're not going to, we see that may not work inside in the core. This is where also the use of the Go Sdk comes in. So the way Helm works is you have your Helm CLI, like a lot of Go projects, your Helm CLI code or your command code, and then basically you have the library under the hood, which is inside the package. So that library is publicly available. The Go docs are out there. So Helm client itself uses that, and probably for a lot of extensions and stuff like that, we'd say that to customers as well. And there are a lot of customers that are leveraging Helm that write their own clients or their own extension clients to do that. Yeah. So sorry if that's,
well, I think one of the good.
There's no kind of
not at all.
silver bullet answer there.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I mean, the good thing about Helm is that it's so flexible. You can pretty much do whatever it is that you need to. For example, on the topic of secrets, what I've done with my past couple of customers is build in a vault feature, just using, you know, just regular Helm capabilities. You know, build in a vault feature to template out a init container and a sidecar that uses Vault Agent, and then use that mechanism to pull your secrets in. So, you know, not so much a capability to encrypt your secrets in a values file, but more so to on runtime pull those secrets in, and so things like that. I think Helm is very flexible and it's a great tool.
Yeah, and when you talk about the extensions like that, it's amazing stuff comes in from the community. But you know, someone will come in really passionate about the thing they found or the thing they're trying to work on, and like we love that passion, but sometimes we have to kind of, I suppose, we have to cool that passion down a bit, you know, because maybe you as a customer or someone else really has this idea, but that is that edge case that if you start putting into a product, it will just bloat the product and goes away from the core capabilities of the product. So, you know, as part of the 2 to 3 plugin is the simplicity of it, where you decide the particular tiller instance or the particular release you want to you specify the release that you want to convert over. Okay. Now, someone came to me one day that went, "Do you know what? Why don't you get all the releases that are in the cluster?" You know, and I went, "Okay, that's a really good idea, but the code base is just going to go bananas in this." Okay. So what came back of it in the end is a script, and someone came in with, you know, I don't know who came in with, but they said, "Why don't you just script it? So just, you know, use Helm S or kubectl, find out what's there, and then just pipe that into it." And then that went into the documentation. Now, some people will look at that and they say, you know, that's a fudge. You're fudging me here. But it's not. It's that balance between keeping your product, you know, concise and, I suppose, mobile, against making it, you know, like a tanker on fire, you know, that's been attacked by pirates. You know what I mean? That kind of a thing. It just becomes too top heavy eventually. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
I mean, now that we've talked about Helm 2 to Helm 3, where do you see Helm going? You know, we haven't really talked about Helm 4. I know probably people don't want to yet since they haven't moved to 3.
Yeah, you've used the wrong number. I think you've lost 4. The ball didn't fall into 4. Okay, that's a very good question. Yeah. And maybe we're still a bit, or we're still recovering from 3 getting out the door, which is great. At the moment, there's nothing concrete on 4. We haven't exactly talked about it or come up with any concrete ideas. So that's a straight up answer for you. But I will say, because we keep the same version and so tight, and we don't like to break backwards compatibility, we are seeing features at the moment that are coming in going, you know what, that's going to break backwards compatibility, and we're putting 4.x tags on them. Okay, so what's happening at the moment is what we call, I suppose, a natural build up of features, or building up slowly in the 4 bucket that doesn't exist at the moment in our own minds. So I suppose this is kind of a call out to folks. You know, if you have ideas here, if you think you'd like to know where you want Helm to go, or what's going to be Helm next, which is, I suppose, Helm 4, as you say, it'd be a good time to come in. So that's probably an answer that tells you nothing, but tells you everything at the same time. My apologies.
So if people want to get involved, where do they go? Okay,
so the key place, and I suppose everyone says it, go to GitHub. So Helm has an org under GitHub, github.com/Helm, and under Helm there's a series of, it's best described as now, because, you know, it's confusing when you first go in, but when you've been in the Kubernetes ecosystem, you understand this. But so under Helm, then there's a series of different projects. Helm being the core engine, charts being where the charts are. There's Chart Museum, even the 2 to 3 plugin is in there, etc. So there's a series of projects in underneath that. So I'd say, first of all, go there, but also go to the Helm community page, which is Helm. I'm going to say Helm.sh, but I'm going to put it in here because for some reason something's telling me I might be wrong. No, I'm right. Helm.sh. Let me just put it in. Last thing you want to do is give out fake URLs, and somebody loses their job because it goes to some site it shouldn't have gone to. So no, it's Helm.sh, and that got a really good revamp in the last couple of months. So it's quite nice now. There's a lot of content in there. So once you go in there, you get a link to anything from there, from the docs, etc., like that. But definitely just and also, sorry, the Slack channel. We're under the Kubernetes Slack workspace, and we have 2 channels, Helm Dev, or 3 channels: Helm Dev, Helm Users, and Charts. So if you're asking probably open kind of, I suppose, open questions, go to Helm users. And if it's a dev specific thing, go to Helm/dev, and charts is obviously charts.
Nice. Thank you. I am going to pull up that page really fast just so people see the.
Just so I'm correct. Yeah, I wouldn't. I'm not trusting myself on that link. Oh, here we go.
Right, do you see it? Okay.
Sure.
It does look really pretty. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of great work done on the page by a person called Ronan Flynn. He did some great work on that, and a lot of community members and maintainers putting input as well.
Nice, great seeing the migration docs, of course, and all the community info. Awesome. Thank you.
So everything should be there, linked there. And if you find something that isn't, yeah, please raise an issue against it, or push a PR.
So I know we only have a couple of minutes left. Do you want to mention, I know there's been a lot of translation work, and that's something that OpenShift has also been pushing in console is language work. Thanks, Brad. Did you want to mention that really fast before we all head out?
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, because there's a lot of nice work done by community members, and they're doing translation work around our documentation at the moment. So big shout out to the people that have been involved, the community members. They're translating into Korean, Japanese, and Chinese. So that's ongoing work that's happening bit by bit by bit, because it takes a bit of work to get through some of those pages. So that's great. So I suppose it kind of shows too the level of interest that's out there. That you usually see that in a project when the uptake is there, is that people like to get out there and translate into their different languages. So it's lovely to see that. I will not be translating into Irish, by the way, so just in case. We're just too small of a number of people for that.
Never know. Take a poll of the user base.
We could do, yeah, we could do.
All right, so any last questions? Chris, did you have any more on the Twitch channel or others?
Very quiet, actually.
This was a great discussion. Thank you so much, Martin, and Austin, and Shubik, and everybody else for jumping in. It was great to talk about Helm. Yeah,
it was lovely to have people jumping in, asking questions and things like that, because especially, people put me on the spot as well, like, oh, how do you answer that question? And I kind of go, yeah, I don't know. But no, hopefully it's giving people some insight into it, and all your listeners and so forth. So yeah, hopefully it's been of value to people. But thank you so much for having me on board.
Thank you. All right, I know we'll talk soon.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Till next time.
Bye.
And for the next OpenShift.